The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, and business. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they had been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I am your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr. On today's program, we'll discuss black business with Ed Lewis, publisher of Essence magazine. Booker T. Washington, the famous black educator who founded Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, was also a spokesman for black self-help and black business. He founded the National Negro Business League in 1915, and through his efforts to provide occupational training at Tuskegee Institute, motivated thousands of African Americans to enter business during the early 20th century. One of those, Madam C.J. Walker, came to New York and founded a beauty culture business that led her to become the leading black business person, male or female, in the early 1900s. From those early beginnings, black businesses now account for hundreds of millions of dollars in areas as varied as manufacturing, technology, automobile and food sales, publishing, and banking. Ed Lewis, our guest, is publisher of Essence magazine and CEO of Essence Communications Corporation in New York City. Now, Ed, Essence is one of the great stories in black business. Just how did Essence magazine get founded, and how far do you think businesses have come in our community since you founded Essence magazine?
Roscoe, thank you for having me on the show. This is our 24th year of publishing. But Essence came in terms of concept back in November of 1968, when there was a lot of euphoria in the country about getting young blacks in the business, understanding black capitalism. And the idea came about because we realized that the other women's magazines, like Cosmopolitan or Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, were not dealing with the voice, the intelligence and beauty and the role of black women. And so we thought if we came out with a magazine that dealt with those issues and talked about her beauty and her intelligence, that black women would be supportive of this kind of a concept. And certainly with the advent of our first issue of May of 1970, which we started out with a circulation of 50,000, we now, as we sit here and talk in 1994, we have a circulation of 950,000.
Now, it's interesting you say that Essence started out as a magazine, and it is a magazine devoted to black women. Yes. But as far as I'm concerned, many, many black males read Essence magazine.
They certainly do. We have, in terms of our readership of Essence is close to almost over 5 million readers. And out of that readership, close to 30% are men. And I think what we have been able to demonstrate is that black women and men need to understand each other, need to work together for our community to thrive and be able to survive. And so we've always tried to deal with, and certainly the kinds of articles that have been in the magazine, we've addressed issues that men should be concerned about. And even we have an issue entirely devoted to men, our November issue. It deals with men, and because we think it's so important for our community to see that black women and black men working together.
You notice in our introduction we talked about Booker T. Washington, the National Negro Business League in 1915, talked about Madam C.J. Walker as being the wealthiest black person in the early 20th century,
yes,
building on a product that was indigenous to African Americans, the hair straightening, the beauty culture business. Now, Essence magazine, in a sense, Ebony magazine, have built on things that are intrinsic to the black community. We, African Americans, want to hear about ourselves, want to read about ourselves in ways that reflect our dignity, in ways that reflect our heritage. Now, when you started Essence magazine, how did you bring that about? How did you get your staff, and also how did you get your capitalization?
Well, getting the capitalization was very difficult, and it's always been difficult for blacks and particularly for other minorities in terms of getting access to capital. We had a business plan in which we were going around and making presentations to many people on Wall Street, and our business plan called for raising $1,500,000. But what we did is that we opened our doors with only $130,000. And you can see from the beginning that we were undercapitalized from the standpoint of trying to start the magazine. I might add, however, that one of the institutions in the black community that helped Essence in those very, very early days, prior to even getting the $130,000, is an institution that was started by one of my heroes outside my family. That was the late, great Jackie Robinson.
In Freedom National Bank.
Freedom National Bank. Jackie Robinson started, along with a man by the name of Dunbar McLaurin, started Freedom National Bank back in 1964, precisely because it had to be a bank to address our needs and our desire to have capital. But Freedom, when we didn't have any money whatsoever, loaned me $13,000 to keep body and soul together. And if I had not done that, I may not be sitting here talking to you now with regard to how Essence came about. So it was very, very important in terms of the support that Freedom gave us during those early days. In the sense of trying to attract personnel to start the business, there are a lot of women were very excited about the possibilities of a black women's magazine. So we got a lot of requests from a variety of people who worked in other publishing houses, like Time Incorporated, for example. And certainly in the early days of Essence, we wanted to have an entire black staff. And if I had my druthers, that's where Essence would have been. But that certainly was not possible. But we've been able to attract the kind of people that I believe are the heart and soul of Essence. It's a staff in and of itself.
And, of course, you provided an outlet for many creative writers.
Yes,
writers
indeed.
about politics, writers about arts, writers about interrelationship, and you've been very fortunate to have had two wonderful editors, Marcia Gillespie and Susan Taylor.
Yes, indeed.
And you've developed really an institution for African Americans. Essence will always be around, and speaking of Essence being around, Essence is doing other things. You call it Essence Communication. What are some of the things you've done there?
We have a licensing division, which we license the name of Essence on eyewear. We now have a line of hosiery for African American women. We're in the catalog business. We have an Essence by Mail catalog. We're in book publishing. At least we're investors in a book publishing company called Amistad. We have the Essence Award Show, in which we honor outstanding African American women. That's periodically has been seen for the past 2 years on CBS, and now will be seen on Fox this coming April 22nd, 1994. But those are some of the things that Essence is doing. And we also, a year and a half ago, purchased a non-ethnic magazine called Income Opportunities, a magazine that's been around since 1954. Is designed for people who want to understand how to start their own businesses, understand marketing, understand franchising, and where to go, and particularly so with the advent, the real reality of so many corporations like the IBMs of the world, or AT&T and others who are downsizing. So many people are being let off. And it just seems to me, even when these companies become even leaner than what they are now, they're not going to be hiring back these employees. And the magazine, I think, will be able to give advice about opportunities and ideas about starting your own business. And certainly it's the first time you had a minority company buying a majority company magazine, which I think in and of itself is a step in the right direction.
It's very interesting because I know in getting some of your funding, I believe you work with one of the MESBICs, the Minority Small Business Enterprise Groups that were set up by the larger corporations. And now we're getting a tax on those programs that are to give economic opportunities to African Americans going into business, taking contracts with government, etc. I really wonder why we're getting those attacks, because those minority business enterprise groups have been very successful, spawning organizations, helping organizations like your own. What do you think is behind this whole business about you can't have special programs for minorities in business?
Regrettably, Roscoe, even after all these years, the pervasiveness of racism is still loud and clear within this society. I think people forget the reason why MESBICs even started. Started, by the way, by none other than Richard Nixon, the President of the United States. But the idea was to give us at least a step in terms of equal opportunity. What it is about is getting a step into the door and at least having an opportunity to compete. That's what we've always asked. And to the degree that we have been successful, it has created, I think, fear and opposition. And as if everything that we as African Americans do is because we got some special help. Well, that's absolutely nonsense. The African American community has always been about self-help, because if it had not been, we would not be sitting here and being able to survive all the things that's happened to us in our lives in terms of what's going on today.
You know, one of the great arguments in black philosophical political history was the argument between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington.
Yes.
Du Bois suggested that we spend our time electing people fighting discrimination, and Booker T. Washington said, pick up your buckets where they are and develop yourself. And through Tuskegee Institute and the Business League, he began to get into occupational vocational training.
Yes.
So much so that for a period of time there was a conflict between those who were advocating the Du Boisian civil rights and those who were advocating the Washingtonian business.
Right.
Now I think, since we've gone through this a long time, the Civil Rights Revolution started, let's say, in 1954 with the Brown case decision, and then the Montgomery boycott in 55, the March on Washington in 63, the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Acts of 64 and 65. Now we're finding that economically, the average income of the average black family is only 58% of the average white family. And that's exactly where it was when the Civil Rights Revolution started. So what does that tell us about the lessons that we need to learn from our history? Because part of African American legends is not only recognizing those who've done great things, but learning some of those lessons. What do you think this tells us about black business?
I think what it tells us is, I think, something that that I've been very aware of and talked about a great deal, that we within the black community really have to support black enterprises in terms of businesses. Because if the support does not come within our own community, we're not going to be able to grow and provide what businesses are supposed to provide is in terms of opportunity and employment. It seems to me that, for example, I want to build Essence Communications Incorporated. I want to do the same thing that Time Warner does. Because if I can employ over 30,000 people within my community, it go a long way to solving lots of our problems. But in order for us to do that, I need to have support. Black enterprise needs to support. Ebony needs to support. And by doing that, we're able to take care of ourselves. Our money then goes back within our communities and begins to solve some of our problems there.
Now, some folks will say black businesses should not hire only black people. They should hire other people. How do you relate to that?
Well, I'm an equal opportunity employer.
Mm-hmm. Obviously you are.
and certainly Essence, in terms of the staff that I have, is 85% black. But I think we ought to, from the standpoint of hiring African Americans, that's what we ought to do. But where we can't, then we have to hire other people in order to be able to do the job.
I think that's one thing a number of folks overlook when they see that African American businesses have their genesis in the African American community, and it's clear that most of the people they hire will be people who are African American.
Absolutely.
It also is clear that there are many people in the majority community who have both commitments and abilities to help our businesses grow. Now let's talk about some of the other successful business folks. We've had Ebony Magazine, which was started, as John Johnson talks about, borrowing $500 from his mother and starting Negro Digest.
Yes, indeed.
But Ebony Magazine probably is the largest of our African-American publications. We had Black Enterprise Magazine, which focuses specifically on business, with your good friend and my good friend, Earl Graves.
Actually, Black Enterprise was started in August of 1970. Essence was started in May of 1970.
That's really wonderful.
And we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary in 1995 together.
Now, why is it that these black publications became such a great part of the intrusion of blacks into the business world? I think on the list of top businesses, at least until very recently, most of them were publications.
I think we feel a real void, a real niche in the marketplace. There was a problem, and from the standpoint of Ebony coming out, and blacks wanting to see themselves, because they were not seeing themselves in Life magazine, for example, or Look magazine at that time that was being published. And certainly when Earl and I came into being in 1970, there was a void in the marketplace. And we needed to have an understanding about what's going on in business. And Earl was able to develop that niche. Black women who play such an extraordinary role with regard to everything that happens with our community wanted to see themselves, wanted to make sure that their voice is heard. And to the degree that the responsibility is upon us as managers to try to produce the best kind of quality of magazine for her. And I think out of that, all businesses from that standpoint really have to have a real niche in terms of their raison d'etre for coming into being. And as Earl Gray's list has grown over the 24 years that it's been in business, we, by the way, have been a part of that list every year since he started the 100 Black businesses. And it's about filling a void, and it's about employing our people. It's about sales, and we've seen the sales in terms of 100 Black businesses grow dramatically over this 24-year period.
Well, it's estimated, I think, the purchasing power of the African American community is over $300 billion.
Yes, indeed.
And unfortunately, a relatively small portion of that is actually spent with African American businesses. I know that in Black Enterprise magazine, where they present the diagram of the share of African American businesses, it turns out that something on the order of almost 64% are in automobile and food sales in terms of that list. Publishing gets a small percentage, and manufacturing gets an even smaller percentage. What do you think we need to do to broaden that? Clearly, we ought to be selling automobiles, we ought to be selling food and beauty products and so on. But what can we do to broaden this? Can we get into the information and the technology business, the manufacturing business, the distribution business?
We must get into all those businesses, and particularly today, there's no more such thing as a Cold War. There's a cold economic war that's going on with regard to us understanding the real reality in terms of the technological revolution that's taking place within our society. And the use of computers, we need to be in telecommunications. We just have to understand the basics, understanding of reading, writing, and arithmetic in order to get into to telecommunications or to get into to banking, because the world is very global, is very interdependent, and we're going to need all these skills. And we should have no fear about going into these areas that manufacturing, for example, or biotechnology, or telecommunications, or certainly the superhighway, the extraordinary things that are going to happen with interactive shopping and the telephones and television are all going to have impact on all our lives, and we need to be there.
Of course,
we need to understand that.
That leads us to the information revolution.
Yes.
The fact that so much of the new economy is information, and when we look at our employment patterns, so much of our unemployment is because so many of our people are unskilled. Yes. At the same time, when you look at the males and females in colleges, you find that about 65% of the African American college students are women. Now, what does this say about opportunities for women in business? And maybe you might reflect on some of the leading women entrepreneurs, because I think that's very important as we look at this emerging black business opportunity.
Well, I think the economic revolution that has taken place within this country over the past 2 decades has been women in general, and black women in particular, in the workforce, because they've been the engines with respect to economic development in terms of becoming 2 household persons that are so needed. And I do think that the opportunities for women, black or white, are going to grow immensely because there's just a need for their skills, and women also are pushing and agitating and wanting the doors to be open, even though there still is a glass ceiling in many corporate America today. But they keep pushing, and they keep going to school. They keep demanding that I want to have the same opportunity as the male counterpart. And this is not going to stop. It's going to continue on. And certainly from the standpoint of African American women, Anesta Procope, who started a very successful insurance company, is certainly a real role model for so many African American women.
Carolyn Jones in the advertising field, Ruth Clark in the employment field.
Ruth Clark. So, I mean, there are a number of women that are really doing their own thing.
Well, now let's look at how the impact of black businesses working with black businesses has infused or infiltrated the white corporate world. What's the dynamic there? Clearly, through equal opportunity programs, there are more corporations hiring African Americans. But are some of those becoming leaders in their particular industries?
I think so. I think it's been an eye-opener for corporations, majority corporations who have been working with black businesses or Hispanic businesses from the standpoint of understanding that they can or we can produce quality products with regard to what the needs are. And I think this is going to be a continuing factor. Just the other day, I was reading about a major black law firm that's been also working with some of the majority well-known law firms in terms of parceling out legal matters. They're working very well together. So I think this is going to be a continuing trend, and ought to be.
And then, of course, in some of the major corporations, there are people like George Lewis, who's the vice president for finance at Philip Morris.
Yes.
People like Lee Archer, who was at General Foods. A number of people who've gotten successful in those areas. And then, of course, we have the case of Reginald Lewis,
yes,
who, in developing a leveraged buyout, took over TLC Beatrice, the largest food processing company in Europe, and actually rose to number one on the 100 Black Business list. But are there other opportunities that you can see for African Americans? Are there opportunities in the world of sports, for example? Opportunities in the world of entertainment? And we know we have our good friend Percy Sutton, who has really been the leader through Inner City Broadcasting Company, WBLS, WLIB, the Apollo Theater.
Yes.
But are there other opportunities in other fields that you might suggest where African Americans can move in?
I think there are a myriad of opportunities in other fields. I think telecommunications is an opportunity. I think mail order is an opportunity. I still think there are some manufacturing possibilities for us. And certainly we have not exhausted the field in terms of banking. And we have not exhausted the field in terms of publishing. Certainly, even though Ebony, Black Enterprise, and Essence are the three dominant institutions out here with regard to publications, we don't have all the answers to the needs of our African American community. And so I think there are opportunities there. And we're certainly beginning to see publications come into being now that are trying to address those aspects that are not being covered by Earl, John, and myself.
Now, as a successful black entrepreneur, what is the key to getting capital? You started with $13,000 and you needed $1.5 million. Now, in the real world today, I don't think you could really make it that way. But tell us, let's discuss this whole question of capital, because there's a belief of some of us that the denial of capital in our communities is one of the major factors that causes us not to have more people in the business enterprise.
Access to capital has always been a problem. I do think it's a little bit better with regard to opportunity being there to get capital. When I say that, I mean there are just many more venture capitalist firms that have started. There are many more MESBICs. The banking institutions are much more sensitized with regard to providing opportunity. And I think with the new administration that we have down in Washington is also more interested in making sure that certainly loans are being made to our community. And I think one has to start with the business plan and hopefully meet the right kinds of venture capitalists or MESBICs that may be sympathetic with regard to providing the kind of seed capital to get started. But it also may mean borrowing from family and borrowing from friends, because that's how most businesses get started. And that's just a part and parcel of how one goes about starting a business.
But what about the role of education in being prepared to do business? We have a tremendous dropout rate, particularly among black males, and I sincerely believe that the attraction of business should cause more of those folks to stay in education, because if you don't have education, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most people who study this, you're not going to be successful in almost anything. What about education?
I would absolutely agree. I happen to think that education is a way out for us in terms of poverty within our community. It certainly helped prepare me to provide the necessary skills of basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. And to the degree that we can stress, it's not the panacea, but certainly is one of the real keys, one of the solutions that education can help prepare us. And hopefully we in the business world can become role models in terms of how to do it, in terms of the hard work that it really takes, and just sheer perseverance with regard to wanting to have something of your own and making sure that you work hard to see that it's accomplished.
Well, the other thing about education with African Americans is that education will help them to understand where they come from. Where they came from, the heritage, the history, and that's why we like to talk to African American legends like Ed Lewis.
Oh, you're very kind.
But it's true that you are a legend. It's true that many of the people who have gone into business, the Percy Suttons, the Earl Graves, the John Johnsons, the Madam C.J. Walkers, the Ernesto Procopes, those are people who really inspire our young people. And I think, and I know you do it, that more people who are in business, more African Americans, need to get out and help our community understand, number one, what business is,
yes,
and how to prepare for it, and the fact that you can be successful if you try.
Absolutely. If we can get that message out in terms of the importance of business, because one of the things that business can do is employ our own people. And whatever success that Essence has enjoyed, that I'm enjoying, is because I stand on the backs of so many people that have come before me within our community that helped me to be where I am today. And it's not about Ed Lewis did this or Clarence Smith, my partner of 25 years, did that. It's because so many African Americans died for us with regard to assisting us in terms of where we are today. And we owe that in terms of giving back to the community to make sure that we help our brothers and sisters with regard to understanding the basics of what business is about.
That's a great message, Ed Lewis. Despite the obstacles, the future bodes well for black business. Increasing numbers of African Americans are interested in entrepreneurship. More African American college students are studying business, and barriers to capital for black businesses are gradually being lowered. Businessmen like Ed Lewis have become role models for other African Americans who aspire to owning their own business. Thanks to Ed Lewis for sharing his insights and his experience on black business with us.